Expedition. They've been gracious to bless us with some of the food that they've provided. So moving on to the second most visible, or arguably the first as well. Moving on to the next most visible cooperative that we experience in Chicago or even nationwide, we're going to be discussing food co-ops. Food co-ops is very important as food expenditures on a monthly base is somewhere 20%, 20 to 30% as well. So food co-ops as well get rid of some of the economic leakage. I am happy to present a panel on food co-ops represented by three of the food co-ops that's operating or beginning to operate in Chicago, and Nancy, a co-op accountant.
Thank you so much. Hi, how is everyone today? Can you hear me okay? Awesome, great. My name is Nancy McClellan, and I'm a CPA specializing in hyper-local small businesses and co-ops in the Chicago area. And I would love to introduce our amazing panel of cooperators in the food co-op sector today. We've got Sharon Hoyer from the Dill Pickle Food Co-op down in there on the end, Greg Berlowitz of Chicago Market here in the middle, and Vanessa Stokes from the Austin Food Co-op. And assisting us from the wings is Dana McKinney, also from the Chicago Market. And we all know that there's so much involved in successfully developing any type of co-op. And if you haven't checked out the website for the University of Wisconsin Center for Cooperatives, it's a fantastic resource, and they go through each of those stages involved. It's fantastic. I do have some copies printed out if you're interested, if that's something that you want afterward. But when a consumer co-op such as a food co-op is the goal, there's an additional set of requirements such as membership recruitment and plan particulars, inventory sourcing, site selection, staffing, and of course details like your point of sale system and other internal system selections. However, we all have in common with other cooperatives the shared values of solidarity, self-help, and democracy. Now, I work with a lot of types of co-ops in my capacity as a CPA, housing, worker, consumer, and so on. And I'd like to get a sense of who's in our audience today. Are we looking at people who are members and want to better understand the food co-op model, or representatives from other food co-ops who are in the process of forming and want to hear about next steps, or just curious non-food co-op folks? So, show of hands, how many here are involved in some way with worker co-ops? We've got a few workers. Okay, great. How many of you are with housing co-ops? Housing co-ops? Got a few people, okay. How many have shopped at a food co-op before? A lot. Oh, this is great. Love you. Of those people, how many of you are members of a food co-op? Also wonderful. And we're going to get the rest of you on board by the end of this. So I come at this aware of how easy it is for co-ops and small businesses in general to neglect the importance of bookkeeping, point of sale and accounting software, patronage, dividend, taxation and tracking, various types of sales taxes, metrics analysis, audit prep, so many other areas. In my opinion, without tracking costs properly, there are very few measurements of success or failure. And the advice that I would like to make sure that I share from my perspective is applicable across all co-ops, but especially food co-ops. And I'm familiar with the ebb and flow of the startup phase, as well as the need to push things forward when working with a group-run operation. However, we just don't have the capacity today to get into the nuts and bolts of things. So I have brought some printouts of accounting practices for food co-ops, the University of Wisconsin resources that I mentioned earlier, a lot of good stuff, and I'll make sure that it's available in the tabling area. And I'm going to make myself available as much as I can at the conference today. If you have specific questions about any of those areas, shoot me a note afterward if you don't find me at the conference today. So our panel is going to take a little bit of a broader view, and we're going to hear from our panelists about their experiences and advice about how to start a co-op. Excuse me? Speak a little slower. Speak a little slower. Sure, I can do that. Trying to pack in a ton of information into a short time.
Translation.
Oh, thank you so much. I didn't realize we had translation here. Sharon can speak to what it's like once a grocery co-op opens and the expansion process. Greg can speak to the long haul of getting open in stages 2 and 3. And Vanessa can speak to what it's like just starting out in stage 1. And hopefully this will give you a clear picture of all of the different stages that food co-ops go through in that long journey. So we're going to begin with how the cooperative model works for a food co-op and how to start one. So I would love for each of our panelists, we'll start with, for this question, we'll start with Vanessa and go in that direction. What are the most common reasons that someone would want to start a food co-op? Do all food co-ops start because there's a food desert or no other grocery options? And why are they even a viable option in a food desert? Vanessa, if you'd like to start.
I live and work in the Austin community, and you're correct, we are a food desert. So the whole purpose of me starting this venture was to create a grocery store. It's the conventional grocery store in a community that does not have many options, or many healthy options. So, you know, I've been working on this for a while, for a few years, and kind of throwing the idea around with people, and folks were kind of, you know, just unaware of what co-ops are, and, you know, that's kind of been the struggle, and I think going forward is going to be the struggle of just informing people about co-ops. You know, most folks just don't know much about them. You know, most people say, oh, is that a commune? You know, like, you know, it's like they go jump into like this whole other thing. You know what I mean? So one of the things that we're starting with is just creating like an engagement plan, how to engage the community and how to just inform the community about co-ops. What was the other question? I'm sorry.
The most common reason someone would want to start a food co-op.
Well, in our community is to create community, really. I mean, that's what co-ops are really about, just around food. And then also to create just a community wealth, you know, just create wealth within the community, create something that people could feel good about, and they could see what their part, what it can actually create. So.
Sorry, I need to interject for 1 second. At 11:15, we have a panel on a breakout room on community land management happening in the other room. I didn't mention that at the beginning, so I figured I'll mention that. I'm done.
Thanks, Vanessa. Greg, common reasons for starting a food co-op and what you're seeing from the Chicago market perspective.
Okay, great. I'm going to start where Vanessa left off, because I thought she hit upon three really important themes, which are community, community wealth, and food. We started 4 years ago on the far north side of Chicago, and we have just signed a lease for a space on the corner of Wilson and Broadway, right in the center of Uptown. It is not a food desert. There's an Aldi just down the street, there's a Target down the street, there's a Jewel just down the street. We have Whole Foods, we don't have a Trader Joe's in the area, but there's a lot of food there, but none of them provide the three things that Vanessa talked about: community, community wealth, or the third thing I'd like to talk about, which is a choice of local and organic food, which is the focus of Chicago market. We all know the wealth and the breadth and depth of farmers markets, where there's farmers coming in from all different areas to sell food here. But food co-ops tend to be the best vehicles for providing that food on a daily basis. I was fortunate to live in Champaign, where there was a food co-op. I was in Madison, where there was a food co-op, and I visited Minneapolis, where there were lots of food co-ops. And when I came back to Chicago, at that point, about 8 or 10 years ago, Dill Pickle hadn't even opened yet. And we said, there's no food co-op in Chicago, why isn't there one? A few years later, Dill Pickle opened, and when we realized there was nothing on the north side which could bring all of this wonderful food that's being grown around us on a daily basis, but then also provide the community, also provide the solidarity, the equity that Vanessa was talking about, all the values of co-ops. And also, at that point is when Dominick's left, and we saw how a corporation grocery chain could rip out the food sources of a whole city. So the community wealth became really important at that point. We've seen Amazon buy Whole Foods. We've seen Kroger buy Mariano's. It's all corporate control now. Food co-ops are owned by the community. They're literally owned by the members of the community. So the combination of this terrific food, the community wealth, and then people coming together is really the reason that we started Chicago Market.
That's fantastic, thank you. And Sharon, what's your experience in terms of the reasons that Dill Pickle started?
I think Greg and Vanessa covered the bases to a great extent. the dill pickle story started in 2004 when organic and local food was not as readily accessible pretty much anywhere as it is today. And the landscape of the neighborhood we're in on the northwest side is something in between what's being described here. You know, it was not by any means a food desert, but there was not everyday access to organically produced foods. That was a big priority of the owners who founded it. And the motivation on the dill pickle organizing had a lot to do with meeting community needs, all the needs that these guys articulated so well. Founding owners wanted a grocery store where they could buy produce from their local farms every day. They didn't want to have one single person have to have the responsibility for putting it together and running it. So they said, why not do this cooperatively? Happy to say that 9 years later, we've expanded and our ownership is growing, and we're really proud and happy to be in a situation where we're demonstrating that a consumer ownership model can work here in Chicago.
Thank you so much. Those are all great answers. We alluded briefly earlier to how the stages of opening a food co-op are the same as in any other type of food co-op, but there are additional steps as well. So someone decides they want to start a food co-op. Where do they begin? Could each of you give us a brief overview? Tell us what the stages are, where you are in the stages, what you're working on now, and what your next steps are. I'd like to start with Dill Pickle Food Co-op, since Sharon can talk us through the continuity of the experience and give some words of advice to new co-ops starting out.
I'll try to keep this brief and paced not too quickly. So, as I mentioned, the Dill Pickle was founded in, originally bylaws were written in 2006. The first store opened in 2009 in a room about half the size, where we operated over capacity for about 8 years. And 5 of those years was planning and expansion, which was essentially like being a startup all over again. And we went through all of the stages that startups go through. We had the benefit of the staff, we had the benefit of an operations already demonstrating the viability of cooperative models. But it was extremely challenging, and I cannot possibly get into every single aspect of it challenging, but you know, consumer education, community education is an ongoing challenge for co-ops, and it's really exciting to be in this room and see a sold-out audience for cooperatives, because I think, like Vanessa said, that's honestly the biggest first hurdle. Financing is always a challenge, and I'm glad to see financing on the program today. Our project was $3.5 million. We raised $1 million of that from our community owners in the form of direct owner loans. Over 200 loans came in, varying in size from $1,000 to 6 figures. And then the rest came from community development funds. So Chicago Community Loan Fund, Shared Capital in Minneapolis. We're really happy to be financed entirely by organizations that are aligned with our values. Our original store was funded by members alone. It was the height of the recession, so we had $150,000 and a whole lot of heart to work with and a staff of 3. We had no bank debt, which is kind of great, except we had no balance sheet to show when we went into an expansion. So there was a lot of trust to build up there as well. So I know I focused on money, but that's usually the thing you wind up spending a lot of time thinking about when you're getting something off the ground.
Great. What stage are you guys in right now? What have you seen so far, and where are you going next?
Okay. I want to pull back just for a second. I think that it's important to know for people, if you're not aware, and this is on the University of Wisconsin website, there are 3 major stages of co-op development over the 20th and 21st century. The first was in the 1930s when federal laws were passed which allowed the existence of co-ops. The second was in the 1960s when people first became aware of where their food came from and who was controlling the food and how it was being grown. And we are in the 3rd wave right now. There are more food co-ops being developed right now than at any other time. As a result of that, there's some terrific national organizations. I bring those up because they have helped us tremendously through this whole process. When we started, Dill Pickle was open, and there are 7 cooperative principles, and principle 6 is called cooperation among cooperatives. And it is bigger than all the rest combined, because we literally rely on Dill Pickle. We wouldn't be where we are right now without Dill Pickle's experience. And I want to turn this way and say, then, you will then get that from us when we're open. And that is, I think, the foundation of how cooperatives develop, working together. Where we are in the stage is where we're in between where Vanessa was and where Dill Pickle is. As I said, we just got our space, but it took us 4 years to get that space. A year and a half was spent looking for the space, and then another year was spent negotiating for the space. We're now in the stage where we need to raise almost $5 million to build out the space. We're working with some of the same community development funds that Dill Pickle worked with, and we just had a meeting yesterday with our funders, so we are right in the midst of raising the money, doing preliminary drawings for the space, and starting to hire people like Sharon to run our store.
Vanessa, you're at the very beginning of the startup phase. What does that look like?
Well, our situation is a little different than most co-ops. Like, most co-ops start out with a group of people that come together to really create the co-op. So our group is Brianna Shields and I. That's our group. So we have to recruit a steering committee. So that is going to be a little challenging, because we're going to have to educate and recruit at the same time. So that's where we're at right now. We're planning our first community town hall in October, and that will have just more information about co-ops, and then just reaching out to the community to get more people involved in the steering committee. So that's where we are right now. We had a intern. Alec is our intern, and he's been working with us for the last 3 or 4 months, just helping us plan for the next stages. And that's pretty much where we are right now.
That's step number 1 here.
Yeah,
And I do
so we're
have a
in
few
stage
copies
1,
of
yeah.
this if anybody wants one. But it's establish a steering committee, conduct a feasibility study, draft your articles of incorporation and bylaws, prepare a business plan, secure financing, recruit members, and then recruit personnel. Those are the various stages. So we've got examples of almost all of them.
One last thing I want to say. So we also were just amazing connections that we got with UIC and their urban planning department. So Stacy Sutton in her class last year helped us with a feasibility plan. So we got a feasibility study.
Wow. Before you have a steering committee.
Before
That's
we have a steering
impressive.
committee. Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of like we're in a really good place right now, just with what is going on co-ops. And so, yeah.
That's fantastic. So food co-ops are different from buyers clubs, farmers markets, and CSAs. I hope we're all aware of that here, because that can be a really challenging thing for co-ops to try to explain to people. But they do often work with them. They're often confused with them. And then there's also differences from co-op to co-op. They're not all the same, we know that, but how are they not the same? Is it structure and policies? Are there different operating options? Membership? How do co-ops differ from the places that they're confused with? How do they differ from each other? And Greg, I would love to start with you on this.
There's different legal structures between buying clubs, farmers markets, CSAs, and food co-ops. So a CSA, as you know, is consumer supported agriculture. You can buy a subscription and get a share from a farm. Farmers markets are vendors in an area selling their food to the public. Buying clubs can be organized in different ways. Usually it's a group of people buying food cooperatively in their house or in a space and sharing it. Food co-ops, as Vanessa said, operate differently, but in general, food co-ops are almost always storefronts where people become members. Most food co-ops, anyone can shop at, but people are members, and that supports the food co-op. There are a couple food co-ops. Park Slope Food Co-op is super famous for this in Brooklyn. You have to be a member to shop there, but that's an old model that's not widely replicated. Within food co-ops, I think maybe shift over to Sharon.
That sounds great. Yeah, Sharon, do you want to talk a little bit about how food co-ops differ from each other as opposed to from these others?
Sure. Again, the food co-op, like any other, is organized to meet the needs of its members. So there's a lot of flexibility within that in terms of how they're structured. You'll see a lot that have a similar structure, which is consumer ownership, one class of consumer ownership, and then the typical organization of the staffing structure. You may also see multi-stakeholder models where there are two classes of ownership, a consumer owner, and then a higher equity, higher return worker owner share, with seats on the board for both consumer owners and worker owners. And there are a few rare worker-only owned co-ops. Alberta Co-op, Alberta Groceries in Portland converted from consumer ownership to worker ownership. So when we say food co-op, we tend to think of one thing. It does not always mean consumer, and that doesn't always mean just one type of consumer ownership. There are many, many co-ops that have union contracts. There are co-ops that have union contracts and multi-stakeholder models. So if people can think of what it is they want to do, they find a way of organizing it that way, is what we've seen.
Yeah, the limitations that food co-ops have are the same limitations that any other cooperative has in terms of one member, one vote, and the various principles that I know you all are familiar with. Food co-ops have to deal with all of those exact same things as well. But within that limitation, you can be as creative as you possibly can be. And we're seeing a lot of variety exploding on the scene right now in terms of capital structures for cooperatives. So there's a lot of variety out there.
Just to point out what Sharon said at the very beginning, under Illinois law, food co-op, that's it.
That's statute.
So you can do it any way you want. You can create a food co-op with different share programs, with different work programs, really whatever that you can fit into the law, you can do.
Although saying fit into the law is actually a very good point, because there are also federal laws, labor laws, that can be a little bit challenging for cooperatives to work with, because cooperatives often think of themselves as or at least their members do, think of them as not-for-profits, and so volunteer work can be kind of difficult to work into that model when you've got fair labor laws there, even if the volunteers want to work. And sometimes the Department of Labor gets a little confused about cooperatives, so that can be a challenge as well. Vanessa, have you found any challenges, or what have you guys been going through in terms of being able to decide what kind of structure your co-op is going to be having?
Well, right now we're looking at either a consumer-owned co-op or a hybrid model of a worker-owned, consumer-owned co-op. So we haven't gotten to that point yet, but we're definitely looking at those two, just because we see that having a worker-owned piece to a co-op in a community like Austin on the west side can really help to bring that wealth building aspect to the co-op.
And if people are curious about how that works, there's a really good, you can Google the Cleveland Model Cooperative, and they've got a whole series of organizations that are worker-owned in full or in part, and then also have a consumer perspective to them. Great series of places out there. So I'm curious, we started talking about challenges here. Let's move right back into it. Challenges and obstacles that are inherent in the process. I'm going to start with Sharon again, because I want to know what was most surprising about the experience of starting a co-op. And is there anything you would have done differently? I know the average length of time it takes to open a food co-op is 5 to 7 years. It can take 10. It can take longer. Why does it take so long? Why do people even bother with that? And if you are able to kind of build on that, we're talking about food co-ops in an urban grocery marketplace here. So that's like another separate set of challenges that are inherent in this process. So given your experience with Dill Pickle, can you speak to some of the challenges, some of the things you would have done differently?
There's a lot in that.
Lots of layers.
So the surprising thing is how long it takes and how much money it costs. I'll leave it at that. That's probably true in projects beyond cooperatives. Things I would do differently. So I did not make the decisions on the opening, the original store. I came on to staff at opening of the original store. I wasn't the general manager then, so I was just brought onto the team and learning as I went. Still learning as I go. And the expansion, you know, I think it gets hard to know where you want to stick to your guns on your community and what you feel is right for your organization and your own identity. Because to go back to why do people bother, I think you articulated pretty well earlier, Greg, in terms of community. Community is one of the most powerful aspects of this. You can talk about the economic model to people till you're blue in the face, and they want to get their groceries and they want to go home. You know, it's an ongoing conversation to build up that understanding of the economic power of cooperation. But if they come in and they feel a sense of belonging, that gets people coming back and getting curious. So that's why I think people bother. And then that community is very powerful in terms of the identity of the organization you're building. And as you grow, and if you make a leap like the Dill Pickle made, which was massive, from 1,300 square feet to over 10,000 square feet, from a staff of 14 to a staff of 43, overnight, a lot is going to change. And the idea is, how do you manage that change? What do you hold on to? What do you allow to change? And I can't say there's any one thing I would do differently. You pick what you're going to adopt and how you're going to evolve, and then you adjust and you acclimate. But I will say that's knowing where you draw the lines and what you say, okay, we're going to just take this because others have done it this way and that's what they say works best, versus, no, we're going to do something different. That's very, very difficult to navigate. I don't have the answer as to how to do it perfectly. But,
Thank you so much.
Sorry, that was long.
No, that's fantastic. Dill Pickle, has the most experience in the Chicagoland area in terms of, being of the current food co-ops that are either in existence or in planning. So that's invaluable. Greg, the urban grocery marketplace that you guys are in, you mentioned there are all of these places that are already around there. The challenges that are inherent in your process of developing a co-op in that environment.
I will echo the amount of time it takes. We don't know yet how much we're going to spend, so I can't speak to that. We started officially in 2014. We now have 1,300 owners. We have a lease on a space. We know at a minimum it's going to take 12 to 18 months, possibly 24 months before we open. Altogether, that's a 6-year process. And that's a 6-year official process. There were a bunch of people working on it before. If you'll have an official date, then you'll have okay, I've been working on it, 18 months before that. So it takes an incredibly long time. All 1,300 owners are signed up one at a time. One person at a time decides, I'm going to buy an ownership in this co-op and commit my financial and community resources to this co-op. That was the first hard thing. The second hard thing is, I think that what I learned personally in this process is it's far harder to find a building for your co-op than I thought it would be. I thought, we're in a giant city, this is not going to be our hardest thing. And it took us, we looked at probably 40 buildings that were wrong. They didn't have parking, they were out of the area, they required an immense amount of rehab, they had all sorts of problems. We went into buildings several times. We put bids on buildings. We for a year before we got to the building we're in now. So that took a lot longer than we thought it would. And then on top of all that, that's all the cooperative stuff when you're finding the building and finding your members. Then you're dealing with what any other business has to deal with. Now we're doing construction drawings, and we have to get permits, and we have to deal with the city, and we have to deal with agencies, and we have to deal with contractors, and we have to deal with unions, and we have to deal with garbage removal and all the millions of things that any business has to deal with, and that takes a long time too. So we are all on Chicago Market unpaid volunteers, all of us, working huge amounts of hours to make this happen. Why bother? I think it's because of the community. I think it's because we believe that this store that we build will be so much greater than the sum of our parts, will be a long-lived entity in the world that embodies the cooperative values, and I think that's why it's worth all this time. But it's a long slog.
Now you're in a very different phase. You're also in a very different neighborhood. What kind of challenges are you seeing starting this off? You mentioned earlier people have no idea what a co-op is.
Right.
Is that your biggest challenge so far? What are you looking at?
Right now, I think the biggest challenge is finding steering committee members. You know, just the basis of, you know, having people commit their time and skills and effort to,
Especially when they hear from these guys,
yeah,
how long?
Yeah, exactly. I
how long-
mean, it's a long
commitment.
haul. You know, it's a big commitment to ask a lot of people to be committed to. So we're looking for really passionate people that see that, you know, starting or creating something in a community to have healthy food options, community wealth, you know, just building something in a community where people can actually see what's possible. So, you know, that I don't think that will be much of a challenge once we start getting out and you know, just having that engagement with the community. So that's where we're still in that stage. Though.
Right, and how do you reach out and find those people? In the
Yeah,
first place?
exactly.
You know they're out there, but
Yeah,
how do you find them?
and one of the things that we've been seeing is like we started with a pool of people that already are engaged in the community, so they already have like a ton of different commitments.
Yeah.
So like finding people that don't have a whole lot of commitment, you know, finding people that have like just passion around food and community.
That's great. Well, we've talked about challenges. Let's go the opposite direction. Let's end on a high note here. What is the best thing about working in a food co-op or working to build a food co-op? And what are you most excited about relating to the journey ahead? And I'm gonna come right back to you on this one because you're so fresh in the process.
I think that, you know, building community is what I've always wanted to do around just how people can see what is possible in their community. You know, living in a predominantly Black community and having a lot of blight, and you know, I think people are so used to seeing that, and so not seeing that is a huge opportunity for people to see what's possible. So, you know, that's why I'm doing this. It's not really for me, it's for people to see what's possible that can be created in their own community.
That's my following. Here, standing on end, that's so beautiful.
Thank you.
Greg, what about you? What are you most excited about next?
I think that being part of a food co-op is unlike being part of any other organization. I think shopping in a food co-op is different in terms of energy, in terms of you feel commitment of staff, you feel that food is different. It's different than walking into Jewel or walking into Whole Foods or any other store where people are just working and doing their thing. But when I was part of Common Ground Food Co-op in Urbana before it expanded, part of different food co-ops, other places, I walked in and I know the cashier and I know the people shopping and our kids know each other. And there's this. It's in a city, but it's still a community of people gathered around food and gathered around a shared commitment to where the food comes from, how it was produced, and why we're all making that effort to be there. And that's what I'm most excited about Chicago Market opening and just walking in every day and just being there.
That is fantastic. I have a very, very personal connection to that as well because I used to do all of our grocery shopping when we went to Whole Foods or whatever, you know, and I would get stuck in this huge store for hours on end. When Dill Pickle opened, we made the transition to my husband doing all the shopping because he enjoys it so much. And I'm telling you, this man is an introvert. He's not excited to meet new people. He comes home, he goes like 3 times a week to Dill Pickle Food Co-op. He comes home and he tells me what all of the different people are doing, what they're up to. I'm just like, who are you? This is amazing. And it's really because he enjoys the experience of grocery shopping because he loves the community. So I love that you touched on that. Sharon, what are you most excited about? What are the best parts of working at a food co-op, running a food co-op, and what's next?
Best parts of working at a food co-op are the things you guys talked about and getting to talk with your husband Mark and people I work with, and being in an environment like that. And I talk about money because I'm in charge of money. Knowing where every dollar goes, that feels really good. And I'm most excited about the future is being here in Chicago at this moment in time. There is so much momentum on co-ops. It seems like out of the blue, like this wave of interest in cooperation, cross-sector cooperation, hooray! At a time when corporate consolidation, wealth consolidation is at a terrifying peak. Like you can really feel that the change is coming, and Chicago is the center of that. So that's what
Oh my gosh, those are all such wonderful points. We have, I think, about 5 minutes left. If there are any questions, thank you all so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. I can't thank you enough. This is just, I hope, been valuable for everyone. So if there are any questions, we have time for a couple. Yeah, back there.
I just had a quick question. I guess this would be for Sharon.
Please stand up and,
Sure.
and be allowed.
I guess if you could just maybe talk through in your cooperative, since it's a little bit more established and in operation, I'm interested to hear if you guys have conversations about cooperativizing the workers too, where those conversations have gone, and just how that maybe discussion goes in your cooperative.
So for anybody who couldn't hear that, does Dill Pickle have conversations about becoming a worker co-op or you know anything going in that direction? Your relationship with us employees.
So our cooperative is consumer owned. There's no worker share. There hasn't been any formalized discussion about going in that direction. I can say that I personally am interested in those conversations. We are unionized with the IWW, and we're also very new still with a much larger staff who are still learning, I think, quite a bit about the cooperative model and about, I think, what's possible as a worker in the workplace. So there's a lot of education to be done, as well as, I think, getting input. So I wish I could say we had much more concrete steps in any one direction, but I think there is a lot of potential there, certainly, especially in our neighborhood and with our population.
And I would love to add to that because I work with a lot of worker cooperatives as well, and I get to kind of compare what the worker co-ops are doing and the food co-ops are doing and the housing co-ops, daycare co-ops, et cetera. And one of the things that I think is a really important point to make is that you don't have to be a worker co-op to treat your workers fairly, and that is one of the very important principles of cooperatives. So fair labor and fair trade are things that the food co-ops that I work with absolutely embrace in a way that I've never seen in the retail sector, otherwise even in other small businesses. So Sharon could certainly talk to you about the benefits that a worker at the Dill Pickle Food Co-op has are substantially different than you will find otherwise in this industry. And I just think that's an important point to make, is that worker fairness and being a worker cooperative, not always the same discussion. So I want to make sure that people know what an important level of commitment to their employees the various food co-ops in the area are making. There was a question over here. Yeah.
Yeah, I was a little late on the discussion, but I'm just wondering, because we're in such a crisis time where, the corporations are taking over, are there any ways in which the kind of acquired wisdom for establishing successful co-ops can help to speed the process for others who want to try and set up their own, but maybe don't have 5 years, maybe they want to do it in 2 or 3. I don't know. This is a tough question, but
That is a tough one.
Yeah,
Greg, you talked about the national support for cooperation.
There are national organizations which help food co-ops, but there are cooperatives in every sector of business. We had a board member who ran an HVAC purchasing co-op. There are agricultural co-ops. There are babysitting co-ops. I mean, there's any business that you create can be run as a cooperative. REI, huge outdoor store, is a co-op. Organic Valley is a co-op. There's a lot of very successful large co-ops, all of which I think will support the development of more co-ops.
Yeah, absolutely, and there are very good resources online for the different types of co-ops. So if you're looking for a particular industry or a particular type of structure of co-op. Google it, you'll find a national group for it. It's truly amazing, the resources that are out there. I saw one over here.
Yeah, going off of what you just said, Greg, in other areas of the U.S., there are some food co-op chains, like in Seattle, there's BCC Markets that has, I think, 11 stores, and I'm curious if there are any expansion goals for your guys' organizations, or if you prefer to remain individual co-ops and remain cooperative co-ops, as you previously mentioned, or perhaps as Dill Pickle is currently doing in the National Co-op Grocers Organization.
I'll pull back. Chicago Market, Dill Pickle, and a couple other co-ops in development in the suburbs, and hopefully you guys, we started a couple of years the Chicagoland Co-op Coalition. It hasn't gone very far other than conversations, but I think we don't have a story yet, but once we have a story, maybe we'll talk about another one. But
like
what
Prairie
we had-
Food Co-op, Food
Exactly.
Shed
In
Co-op, Rogers
Lombard,
Park
there's
Food
a lot of
Co-op.
different co-ops happening in the suburbs right now in different developments. So we have shared resources, but ultimately we have talked, can we get to a place where we share economic resources like HR or purchasing, or can we, once there's more than one, can we find a way to all work together to have bigger market share and bigger market power? So I think that we've had preliminary conversations and not at the point where we can do that. But certainly, I know there are a couple co-ops in Minneapolis as well that have 2 or 3 stores. So there's definitely, and Willie Street Co-op just opened its 3rd store in Madison. So there are definitely co-ops expanding, and that's exciting.
I think we have time for one more. Sorry.
Hello. I wanted to ask Vanessa specifically about the off-premise. You're besides being in the beginning phases, you said that you were informing people about cooperative models as you're trying to recruit them. And I feel as though I'm curious how people outside of the Austin community can support the growth of the Austin Co-op, particularly because there are a lot of people who are intimidated by the west side of Chicago, period. How can all sorts of people be in solidarity with a community co-op in Austin, particularly if they don't live there or aren't familiar with the particular challenges that Austin faces outside of rumors, mythology, and just bullshit?
We want to be open for anyone in the area of Chicago, the Chicagoland area, to be a part of the co-op. So, this is the beautiful thing about cooperative models, is that we want everybody to be involved. At the same time, we want to create a place in a community that does not have a whole lot, So, and I'm saying this because Oak Park is right next door to us, okay? So Oak Park has 10 grocery stores, okay? And there's only 50,000 people that live there, or even probably less than that. And so, I've been getting a lot of people from Oak Park and River Forest that are interested in helping. And I think this is a great bridge to have people from other communities to help. And and I think that especially for white people, white folks sometimes are afraid to come in communities of color, especially on the west side and the south side. And I think this would be a great way to show people that this is possible, that we can have a truly integrated society. And if you have people that are from all different walks of life being a part of something like this, I mean, this could be revolutionary in a way. So I didn't grow up on the west side, so I'm from the north side, on the north side of Chicago. So I have a completely different, way that I grew up. So, being in a predominantly black community is foreign to me. I did not grow up around a whole bunch of black folks. So, I see myself as that connector, the connecting people from all different types of communities to help create something that I don't think anyone's ever seen before. So that's my vision. And it's a little kind of out there, but I just want to show the world that it is possible. Like, we can create a community that is in a Black community with all different types of people being a part of that.
Tremaine, are we out of time, or do we have? All right. Thank you so much to. We'll also make ourselves available for questions as you find us throughout the conference, and if anybody wants copies of accounting best practices for food co-ops or steps in forming a cooperative.